The brass casing hit the concrete floor at 6:47 in the morning, one single round rolling in a slow arc beneath the shooting bench, and the old man bent to pick it up the way a man bends when his knees remember things his face has long forgotten. Careful, deliberate, without complaint. He turned the casing over between his fingers once, set it in his shirt pocket. Then he straightened, adjusted the brim of a faded canvas hat that had no insignia on it, no patch, no unit crest, and walked toward Lane 7 of the Fort Bragg civilian marksmanship range as if he had all the time in the world. His name was printed on the sign-in sheet as Raymond Kowalski, age 71, category civilian guest. The range officer had underlined civilian guest when he wrote it, the way people underline things they find mildly inconvenient. Nobody knew what the brass casing in his shirt pocket meant. By the end of the morning, they would. The range was already crowded when Raymond arrived. A Saturday qualifier for the base's inter-unit marksmanship competition. A small thing, local pride, bragging rights over a fiscal year worth of beers in the mess. 3 teams had signed up, a unit of young Army Rangers who had driven down from their barracks at 5 in the morning and were already loose-limbed and loud about it, a group of Special Forces candidates from the Q course who moved with the careful economy of men who had been awake for 4 days straight and were not going to admit it, and a 4-person civilian guest team that Raymond's granddaughter had quietly registered 2 weeks prior as a birthday gift he had not asked for and would not have refused. His team was not impressive to look at. Raymond in his canvas hat and a flannel shirt with a small oil stain near the second button. Beside him, a woman named Dolores Vasquez, 63, who ran a laundromat in Fayetteville and wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. A wiry man in his late 50s named Calvin Price, who had driven 4 hours from Charlotte and arrived with a thermos of coffee and nothing else. And a young woman, early 30s, named Sarah Park, who said almost nothing and chewed the end of a granola bar with the focused attention of someone doing long division in her head. 4 people who looked, to every eye in that range house, like they had wandered in by accident. The young ranger sergeant who was managing the queue, tall, broad through the chest, with the particular confidence of a man who has been told he is excellent at many things and has believed all of them, looked at Raymond's team clipboard and then looked at Raymond and said nothing for 3 full seconds. The silence had a shape to it. "Sir." The sergeant, his name tape read Holloway, gestured toward the far end of the bench line. "Civilian guests are at lanes 7 through 10. We run a cold range until 0700. Your team will shoot last in the rotation." Raymond nodded. "You need a safety brief?" Raymond looked at Holloway for a moment. "I know what a cold range is, son." Holloway smiled the way men smile when they are not actually amused. "I'm sure you do." He looked at the oil stain near Raymond's button. "I'm just making sure everyone gets home safe." It was a reasonable thing to say. The way he said it was not reasonable at all. Raymond carried a soft-sided rifle case, black nylon, unbranded, the kind sold at any sporting goods store. He set it on the bench at lane 7 and did not open it. He watched the Ranger team go through their pre-qualifier warm-up, disciplined, fast, accurate at distance. They were good. There was no pretending otherwise. The youngest of them, a private named Diaz, who could not have been older than 20, was shooting tight groups at 300 meters that drew low whistles from the other Rangers watching from behind the line. And they were watching Raymond, too, in the way that people watch something they consider beneath their attention. Quick glances, small smiles shared sideways, a nudge between elbows when Dolores unfolded a small prayer card from her jacket pocket and touched it once before tucking it away. Holloway walked the line and stopped at lane 7 again. He had a way of stopping that made his stopping feel like a statement. "You folks competed before?" Dolores looked up from adjusting her ear protection. "A few times. This is a service-level qualifier format. We're running the Atterbury Standard. You familiar with the Atterbury?" "We'll manage," Raymond said. Holloway's mouth did something small and confident. Of course, the Atterbury has some distance elements that catch civilian shooters off guard. Nothing embarrassing. Just a heads up. He walked away. Calvin poured coffee from his thermos and said quietly into his cup, I always did like this part. Raymond opened his rifle case. Inside, on a bed of closed-cell foam cut to fit, lay a bolt-action rifle that was neither new nor ostentatious. A Remington 700 in .308, but modified. The stock was weathered, the finish had been refinished at least once, and along the underside of the forend, almost invisible unless you looked closely, someone had scratched 4 letters into the wood. Not a brand, not a model number. 4 letters that Sarah Park recognized, and that made her glance at Raymond and then look away before anyone could notice her looking. The first relay began at 7 o'clock. The Rangers shot the Atterbury qualifier with the kind of precision that comes from repetition and recent training and the particular energy of men who want to win in front of each other. Their aggregate score after the first 3 stages, standing, kneeling, prone, put them at 91.4% of possible, which was excellent. Their sergeant, a broad man named Willis, who shot beside Holloway, clapped Holloway on the shoulder after the prone stage and said something that made Holloway laugh. The Q-course team shot next. Quieter, more deliberate. They finished at 88.7, a little lower on the standing stage, tighter on the prone. One of their shooters, a woman named Adkins with the stillness of someone who has learned to be patient in bad conditions, posted the best single prone score of the morning, a 9.8 out of 10 at 500 meters. Everyone in the range house took note. Then the range officer called the civilian guest team to the line. One of the rangers near the back of the spectator area said something. Not loud, but not quiet enough. The words, waste of time, were in it. Someone else laughed softly. Not mean, exactly. Just the easy contempt of people who have decided an outcome before it begins. Raymond walked to lane 7. He set his feet. He did not do any of the visible pre-shot rituals that young shooters do. No exaggerated breath, no shoulder roll, no adjusting and readjusting of gear. He simply stood at the bench and looked down range toward the paper target 200 meters away, as if he were looking at something he recognized. He shot the standing stage in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. The range officer called the score. Raymond's 4-shot group at 200 meters measured 1.1 inches, center of the 10 ring. Perfect. Silence in the range house. The kind of silence that falls when something happens that no one's narrative was prepared for. Dolores shot next. She loaded with the reading glasses perched on her nose, settled behind the rifle with the unhurried quiet of a woman who has been doing difficult things unhurriedly for 40 years, and fired a group that measured 1.4 inches. Calvin Price, who had not said a word since his comment about liking this part, went to the bench and posted a 1.3. Sarah Park, last in the relay, adjusted the scope on a rifle that looked standard but had a barrel that suggested otherwise, and posted a 1.0. Aggregate at the end of standing, 93.2%, 2 points above the Rangers. Holloway stood very still behind the spectator line. The kneeling stage began without ceremony. Raymond took the brass casing out of his shirt pocket and set it on the corner of the bench where he could see it. A small thing. Nobody knew why. The range officer gave it one glance and then moved on. Raymond knelt, settled his weight, and began to shoot. Here is what the people in the range house saw. A 71-year-old man in a canvas hat and an oil-stained flannel shirt, shooting a rifle that did not look new, posting groups at 250 meters that should not have been possible from a kneeling position, in a cold morning wind that had been causing the Q-course shooters to call drift adjustments every other shot. Raymond made no adjustments. He read the wind once, a single look at the range flags, a half second, the kind of read that looks like nothing, and then he shot 5 rounds into a group that the range officer measured twice because the first measurement did not seem right. 81 thousandths of an inch. Not a typo. Not a misread. 81 thousandths of an inch at 250 meters, kneeling in a 12-mile-per-hour crosswind. In the back of the range house, one of the Q-course candidates, a heavyset man named Torres who had been in the Army for 11 years and had forgotten more about marksmanship than most people learn, stopped leaning against the wall and stood up straight. He leaned toward the man beside him and said, without particular expression, "That's not a civilian shooter." The man beside him said nothing. They both watched. Calvin Price finished his kneeling stage. Sarah Park finished hers. Dolores, shooting between them, had developed an audience she did not acknowledge and posted the kind of score that made Holloway stop smiling. At the break between kneeling and prone, the range officer went to speak to the base marksmanship coordinator, a retired master sergeant named Dunford, who had been running these qualifiers for 9 years. They spoke quietly near the scoring table. Dunford kept looking toward lane 7. Holloway found a reason to walk past the civilian team's bench. He stopped near Raymond, who was standing with his back to the range, drinking water from a plain plastic bottle, looking at nothing in particular. "Good shooting." Holloway's voice had changed. "Not much. Enough." Raymond nodded. "Where'd you train?" "Around." Holloway waited. Raymond did not fill the silence. "You shoot competitively? Service level?" "Used to." Raymond capped the water bottle. "What branch?" Raymond looked at Holloway then, fully, for the first time. The look was not hard. There was nothing aggressive in it. It carried the quality of a man who has decided, a long time ago, which questions are worth answering and which simply are not. "Prone stage in 10 minutes, Raymond said, and walked back to the bench. Torres, watching from across the range house, said quietly to the man beside him, "You notice the way he held that water bottle?" The man beside him, a young lieutenant named Garrett, who had come to watch the qualifier as a formality, said he had not. "He held it with 2 fingers on the left hand while he drank with the right. Kept his trigger finger index the whole time. That's not a habit, that's a reflex." Torres paused. "I've seen that in 2 places. One of them was the selection course. The other one I can't tell you about." Garrett looked at the old man in the canvas hat. Something about the morning began to shift. The prone stage at 400 meters is where qualifiers are decided. The wind had picked up by 9 o'clock, steady and variable in the way that a range near pines is always variable. The flags reading one thing, the actual condition at the berm reading another. The intervening air doing what it wants. Every team had brought their best shooters to the prone stage. It was the last stage, weighted highest in the aggregate, and everybody knew it. The Rangers went first, again. They were excellent, again. Willis posted a 9.6 at 400 meters, which was superb shooting in that wind, and the team finished the stage with their aggregate still high enough to feel the morning was recoverable. Holloway shot a 9.2. He finished and looked toward lane 7 with something complicated on his face. Less certainty than an hour ago, but still a shape of it. Raymond's team was called to the line. Sarah Park went first for the civilian team. She lay behind her rifle and spent 45 seconds doing absolutely nothing visible before she fired her first round. Then she fired the other 4. The range officer scored her, 9.8. The range house was quiet again. Calvin Price shot 9.5. Dolores, who had been running a laundromat in Fayetteville for 19 years and who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, shot 9.4. Then it was Raymond. He lay prone behind the Remington 700, with the 4 letters scratched into the forend. He settled into the position the way water settles, completely, without effort, finding its level. His left hand cupped the forend, and his right hand found the grip, and for a moment he was absolutely still in a way that is different from ordinary stillness, the kind of stillness that has history in it. He did not look at the wind flags. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, he pressed the rifle into his shoulder one small degree, made one click on the elevation turret that no one near him heard except Torres, who had moved quietly to the spectator rail closest to lane 7, and then he fired 5 rounds in a pattern that sounded, to the range officer, like one sound with brief intervals. The range officer walked to the target at 400 meters. He measured the group. He came back to the scoring table and wrote a number on the sheet, and then looked at Dunford, who was standing right behind him. The number was 10.0. A perfect score. At 400 meters, in a variable crosswind. For a moment, no one in the range house made a sound. Then Willis, the ranger sergeant who had never been Raymond's enemy, only someone who had not yet had a reason to pay close attention, said, "Check the target again." They checked the target again. 10.0. Holloway stood with his arms at his sides and his expression doing something private and uncomfortable that he would not have wanted witnessed. Torres, at the spectator rail, looked at Raymond, and then looked at Dunford, and then back at Raymond. The Q-course candidate Adkins, who had posted the morning's best prone score before this moment, stood very still with her hands flat on the bench. The final aggregate went up on the board. Civilian guest team, 96.1%. Rangers, 92.8. Q-course candidates, 91.3. There was a sound in the range house that was not a sound. It was the shape of many people revising something they had believed before breakfast. Dunford walked to lane 7. He was a man of 62, retired master sergeant, with the kind of face that years of honest evaluation gives a person, open, careful, without pretense. He stopped beside Raymond, who was quietly breaking down the Remington 700 and returning it to its foam-lined case with the same economy of motion he had used all morning. "Raymond," Dunford's voice was low, "I need to ask you something." Raymond closed the case, latched it. "The 4 letters on your stock." Dunford said it the way you say something you have been thinking for an hour and need to put down before it gets heavier. "I've seen those 4 letters one time before in my career. On a display case, in a corridor at JSOC headquarters." Raymond picked up the brass casing from the corner of the bench and put it back in his shirt pocket. "JSOC has a hallway," Dunford continued, "where they put the significant unit identifiers, the call signs, the ones that don't show up in any open record." A pause. "Those 4 letters, COVA, were on a plaque beside a citation I was not supposed to read long enough to memorize. But I have a good memory." Holloway was close enough to hear this. He had not meant to be. He stood 3 feet away with the discomfort of a man who has arrived at a conversation he does not know how to leave. Raymond looked at Dunford. "The citation," Dunford said carefully, "described a 12-hour defensive action in a location the citation did not name. A 4-man element, against a force the citation described only as significantly numerically superior. The element held the position until the rescue package arrived." He paused. "The citation ended with a Medal of Honor recommendation that was downgraded for classification reasons to a Navy Cross, and then the Navy Cross itself was classified." Dunford's voice held nothing performative, just the weight of a man saying something true. "The plaque said the element leader's call sign was COVA." Raymond did not confirm it. He did not deny it. He picked up his rifle case and held it at his side. Holloway had gone the color of a man whose certainties are rearranging themselves inside him, and he is not sure yet where they will land. Torres from the spectator rail had heard enough. He straightened. And then, with the precision of a man who knows exactly what he is doing and why, he came to attention. A full military brace, heels together, shoulders square, eyes fixed on a point above Raymond's hat and below the ceiling. His right hand came up in a salute that was parade ground perfect and completely genuine. He held it. Adkins saw it and understood what it meant before she understood all the reasons why. She came to attention beside Torres and rendered the same salute. Two of the Q-course candidates behind her, uncertain of the full story but certain of what Torres meant by the gesture, came to attention as well. Willis, the ranger sergeant, looked at Holloway. Then he squared his own shoulders and saluted. The range house was very quiet. Holloway stood with his arms at his sides. His face had done something honest, finally. The performance of easy confidence gone from it completely, replaced by something younger and less certain and more genuinely real. He looked at Raymond in the canvas hat and the oil-stained flannel shirt, holding a battered rifle case with the unhurried gravity of a man who needed nothing from this room except a lane to shoot on. Holloway brought his right hand up. It took him a half-second longer than the others. That half-second cost him something, and he knew it. And he held the salute steady until Raymond gave him a small nod that released it. Raymond had not said a word through any of this. He had not needed to. He turned to his team. Dolores was folding her prayer card back into her jacket pocket with the composure of a woman who did not consider any of this surprising. Calvin was screwing the cap back onto his thermos. Sarah Park was watching the room with the even, measuring attention she had worn all morning. Raymond looked at each of them for a moment. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and took out the brass casing, the one he had bent to pick up from the floor at 6:47 in the morning, the one he had carried through every stage, set on the corner of the bench during kneeling, pocketed again for prone, and he held it up between two fingers in the morning light coming through the range house windows. A spent .308 casing, unmarked, cold to the touch, nothing to look at. He set it on the scoring table beside the clipboard that still read civilian guest in underlined ink, and he picked up his rifle case and walked toward the door. Dolores went with him, her beaded glasses chain catching the light. Calvin followed with his thermos. Sarah Park last, and she paused at the door for a fraction of a second and looked back at the range house. At Torres still at the rail, at Holloway with his recovered stillness, at Dunford standing beside the scoring table looking at a brass casing that held a morning's worth of revision in it. She did not say anything either. The door closed behind them. Outside, the morning had warmed by a few degrees. The pines along the fence line were moving in the wind that had made the prone stage difficult, and Raymond walked to the parking lot with no more hurry in his step than he had arrived with. The gravel under his boots made the same sound it always makes when an old man walks across it. Patient, unhurried, present. His granddaughter was waiting by the truck. She was 24 years old and looked like him around the eyes, and when she saw the four of them come out, she read something in how they were walking that told her what she needed to know. "How'd it go, Grandpa?" Raymond put the rifle case in the bed of the truck. He took the canvas hat off and set it on the seat. "Shot clean." She handed him a cup of coffee from the gas station down the road and asked nothing else, because she knew him well enough to know that "shot clean" carried everything he meant to carry. They drove out the main gate at 9:43 in the morning. Inside the range house, Dunford stood at the scoring table for a long moment after they left. He picked up the brass casing, turned it over, set it back down. Holloway came to stand beside him. The sergeant had his hat in his hands, which he had not been doing an hour ago, and his voice when he spoke was quiet and without its earlier architecture. "Who was he?" Dunford looked at the casing. "A man who showed up when it mattered," he said. "That's the full file." Holloway looked at the door. "I treated him like he needed a safety brief." "Yes." Dunford did not add anything to that. He let it sit where it was. After a long moment, Holloway put his hat back on. He straightened it. He looked at the scoreboard, at 96.1% besides civilian guest in block letters, and he breathed out through his nose in the slow way that people breathe when they are trying to settle something inside themselves that has been unsettled. Across the room, Torres was already on his phone. He would later say he was calling nobody in particular. He would also say, to anyone who asked over the following weeks, that he had seen a lot of shooting in a career that included several